Hello, my name is Chris Binder. I'm from Stuttgart, and I work closely together with the Landesmedienzentrum Baden-Württemberg, which is a federal agency a state agency at the federal state level, and it works to its aim is to provide media literacy and digital teaching materials to teachers in schools. And one of the projects I will be talking about today. But first of all, I wanted to start with just a couple of statistics. Maybe some of you are familiar with those, but they're actually from the Medienpädagogischer Forschungsverbund Südwest, which is a scientific institution which tracks media usage among children and adolescents, and they do this by yearly a project where they ask children basically what their media usage is. And what you can see on the screen is how many of them regularly use digital games. And of course, that number is quite high and climbed during the last years. Basically, 60% of 6 to 13-year-olds and more than 70% of 12 to 19-year-olds regularly play digital games. And well, of course, when we talk about education and about children and adolescents, I think this is just another possibility and opportunity to take to incorporate digital games into educational purposes, or into educational context rather. There's another interesting fact about this, and this is sort of the precursor to this whole Minetest topic, which is that the game Minecraft, which is of course very well known, and which is this block-based game, which was not so recently bought by Microsoft, is often stated as the most popular game during of those asked in the questionnaire. And on the right side, you can see those who are 12 to 19 years old, and also in the lower end, those from lower and higher secondary education, they always state that Minecraft is their most popular, most beloved game. So it really goes through all of the age demographics, and is quite popular there, which is, of course, one reason a teacher or one who's interested in education should maybe take a closer look at this. When we look at the younger people, there's FIFA, a football simulation game, still in front of that. But here they asked girls and boys about what their favorite game was, and you can see in the bars that for the second winner, Minecraft, of course, these were much more balanced. So in addition to being for kinds of all of ages, it's also a good choice for different genders. So I quickly wanted to touch upon the notions of gamification, learning games, and game-based learning, just because there's a lot of talk about gamification right now, and of course, this is also interesting and relevant for education as well. So when we talk about gamification, this is basically what you can see on the screenshot on the very left. It is when elements from games, which we know are taken out of context and are used in different scenarios. For example, in this example, which is called Classcraft, the teacher gets a sort of dashboard, and he or she can then give attributes to the students. The students have their own characters which they can access, and of course, if they are well behaved in class, they get some bonuses. They get maybe health points, experience points, or other actions, which we of course know from games. But it's not a game in itself. It's more, it's more of a statistical dashboard, I would say. And in the same manner, of course, if the children maybe forget their homework or are late to class, the teacher can remove some points maybe. The example in the middle is a game which is called Stadt, Land, Datenfluss, which is basically, I would say, a puzzle game or a quiz game. You have this city scape, which you can see in the behind the quiz here. And there, in the manner of maybe city simulation games, one can choose different points, and then these questions pop up. And there's questions about the smart city, about what to be wary of when you're using Wi-Fi networks and so on. But at the end, it's basically a glorified quiz simulation. And oftentimes these learning games are done without proper game design people. So of course, they are not quite that motivational for students and for youngsters. And on the right side, we have an actual game. In this case, this is Minetest, and this has some potentials which I want to talk about, and some opportunities which can be used in this game-based learning scenario. So game-based learning is then the act of using actual games or game environments in educational contexts. And this gives some advantages. Of course, there's an actual social dimension. Youngsters, they talk about games all the time. They use them, and they don't use them alone, but they partake in multiplayer experiences. Then those games are highly motivational. Of course, they are crafted to a very high standard in terms of visuals and also audio. And then there's the self-efficacy topic. So when adolescents, when youngsters, also when just people partake in games, they're presented with this very vivid environment, which actually reacts to what I'm doing in the world or what the player is doing in the world. And the universe of the world can be shaped according to one's wishes. And of course, this gives this power, this self-efficacy to change things and also to learn, to improve, to play the game. Games give immediate feedback. So when I'm doing something wrong, of course, there's always I have the possibility to try it again, or maybe there's some helpful tips. And also the difficulty of the whole universe of the story or game universe gets more difficult over time. And then there's informal or on-the-go learning, which is that if there is factual knowledge in games, this can also be apprehended, I would say, or acquired by people using the game. An example from my childhood is I used to play the game Age of Empires, and I still remember the Japanese and Korean campaign, and there were these boats, and these boats were, I don't know, maybe they're called turtle boats as well in English, but I still remember them. And in fact, they are a historical fact. So these things just stick to one if one is playing the game and really immersed in it. So what is Minetest exactly? It is not actually a game. It's rather a voxel-based game engine. And that is to say, one cannot only play game worlds which are made out of blocks or made up of blocks, but also different games are possible. And in fact, because it is an open source game which is maintained by a community, there are different games available. For example, there's a clone of Subway Surfer, or there's a very cute little game where you control a ladybug which has to find out things in the garden. But probably the most well-known game is the Minetest game, which of course has almost the same name, but which looks like Minecraft and sports some additional features. For example, there's the possibility to do modifications and to shape the game according to one's wishes. a lot of servers which are on the internet and on which people can play for free, offer very different modifications and shape the gameplay accordingly. For example, there's capture the flag game modes, then there's more technical servers where maybe programming, coding, informational knowledge is more required. And of course, then there's a lot of creative servers. Here you can see sort of the whole universe of the Minetest world. There's a lot of modifications, which are actually free and can be downloaded from the website as well. What is also very interesting is that there's only basically one version which you can play on different devices, and there's this sort of interoperability layer. So when you play on an Android device, you can actually join the same world as somebody who's joining from a computer or from a laptop. And on the lower right corner, you can see an actual learning scenario, which I will talk briefly in some more detail. But one of the things you can change about the game is, for example, we were able to change or to include images in the game world. And like that, you can import presentation style images or something as a reference image. In this case, this was to discuss different ship types. And so the game is not that limited in terms of story or in terms of the gameplay mechanics. It can rather easily be expanded. And on the lower left side, you can see a web dashboard. This is the ominous BLOCKALOT web dashboard, which I stated in the title. And I will talk about also what this exactly is in just a moment. But before, I wanted to show off some projects, so maybe you will get a better understanding of what exactly can be done with Minetest. So sorry about the headline, which was cut off here. This is a project from the Computerspielschule, so I would say the video game school project, which is in Stuttgart, Germany. And here you can see a more, maybe more traditional approach to how a teacher or a person talks to students. Sorry. But over time, this came to be much more organic, and the students build up their own place, which is used at the beginning of each session with these different colorful wooden planks and the seating possibilities, so that, for example, these colorful planks can be used for decision making in game. So when people are placed on, for example, the blue planks, they are maybe voting for one or the other thing. And likewise, a lot of notions from the physical world can be incorporated into Minetest as well. For example, here you can see a wall with rules, and these rules were not given by the makers of the project or the teachers, but rather they were developed together with the students. So it says something like, don't attack other players, don't destroy any buildings, these things. And they were discussed actually, and then decided upon and put up on this wall so people can see them. And over time, you don't really need those anymore. You can basically just, or the players themselves will basically just tell other people if they're not conforming to the rules. So for this world, of course, there had to be, it was a interdisciplinary, well, the goal was to improve interdisciplinary competencies like social competencies, problem-solving skills, and so on, and also creative skills. And one of the tasks was to, or one of the opportunities in which the story presented was to build a harbor. And here the students decided and then built the harbor themselves. Likewise, in the city the students played in, or the youngsters played in, a lot of different little things were built by themselves. You have a little farm. There's basically a city hall and various buildings to the side where the students reside in the virtual world. Here, for example, there was a reservatory for camels, and one of the students wanted to build that and actually found out about the requirements for camels and the right biome and built that as well. So there was this kind of knowledge transfer into the game where she also had some signs put up what camels eat and their scientific names and so on, maybe some cautionary information as well. And of course, there's the possibility not only to build something, but also to automate things. For example, with these MESCON blocks, which can be placed in the world as well, and which process information and/or items. And just like this, the students were able to build a factory to produce some of the items they needed in order to achieve the goals which were demanded for by the story. Another very quick example. This was a online school club in Ettlingen with students which were about grade 5 and 6, and this was about crafting cultures. So deciding on one's own culture, and the students in this case were given in various sessions different tasks of thinking about what kind of culture they want to establish in Minetest. And by culture is meant all of the artifacts and structures that come with the culture, that come with the city, for example. So in this example here, the topics of religion and science were chosen. And the students then could think about what they associate with those topics and brainstorm. And then in groups, they were building a city. And of course, a lot of decisions early on decided on how this culture would look later on. For example, that the city was built by the water and in this kind of climate, which you can see on the image. And over time, they tackled topics like infrastructure, transportation. They built a city hall. Then you can see this church in the foreground. There was an open air cinema, and of course also habitation places, basically. And what the group didn't know was that at the same time there was another group on the server as well, in the same world, and they were starting their own culture. And that turned out very differently. It was placed or they choose to place it in the desert. And during the last 2 sessions, a co-teacher of mine and I were encouraging the students to come together and to exchange things about their culture and to present and show that. And just like that, there was this very sudden reflection of how their culture came to be. So maybe if I can take some 3-4 more minutes to just explain what BLOCKALOT is, if you're interested in using it yourself. When you want to set up a Minetest online server, it usually looks like this, very technical. So the Landesmedienzentrum decided to use or to develop this web dashboard, which can be used by teachers and those interested in using Minetest for educational purposes. And there, basically, you can set up learning spaces, which incorporate different map templates or, well, yeah, pre-built maps and/or the basic standard random map, which randomly generated map, which comes with Minetest. And you can do things like user management. So you can set up users, you can give them various privileges. You can also upload images and audio files for certain kinds of educational scenarios. And of course, there's a lot of helpful materials that go with that. Later on, I will put the URL so you can check that out. So for example, there's one map template which deals with media literacy as well. And students learn how to use text editors, file systems, and so on. And a part of that program is takes place in Minetest, and there's this data center which acts as a kind of place to put tokens or badges for the students in order to show how much progress they have. This is of course more of a gamification system, but set in a game-based learning world. But in this world, they can also work on sustainable or sustainability goals, build a sustainable city or village, and also they can improve the data center as well. Then there will also in the future, there will be another map which has it's a different goal in terms of competencies. And for example, one of them is are these flying islands. And the story behind that is that a citizen who's living alone in this house on this cliff wants to get their family to join them, and they have to build some houses or even other infrastructure on these floating islands. And now it is the task of the students to work on sustainability opportunities to build these houses in a more sustainable fashion, of course, and to plan those accordingly. And then the students could, for example, work in groups and work on those plans to achieve their goals. Or a different map template, which is which can't be selected from BLOCKALOT right now, but which is an upcoming project as well, or an upcoming template, which has also a story behind it, where information technology competencies are taught or can be explored in a very story-driven way, and then the students can themselves use those possibilities. So the story behind that is that there are these ruins, and they are found by researchers from the Minesco, which is of course an allusion to UNESCO organization. And now the researchers have to find out how these ancient artifacts work and have to employ them in their own designs in order to improve things about current technology, current machines, or to problem solve things in relation to maybe the climate crisis or other problems of sustainability. So if you're interested in using BLOCKALOT or maybe also in Minetest for education, there's a whole lot of resources you can use. Of course, you're invited to head over to blockalot.de to create your first learning space for yourself. And there's a lot of different events, for example, BLOCKALOT Lab, where there's various topics which are discussed more in detail, and there's BLOCKALOT Connect, where teachers discuss and exchange ideas about how they use Minetest in education. And we have a whole lot of materials which we call stories. There's learning ideas by teachers themselves, something they tried out and maybe that worked well. Then of course the map templates, and we have a lot of information on them in a wiki, and other materials. Basic things like what your controls are for Minetest, up to whole handbooks for how to use Minetest. So with that, I thank you for your participation, and if there's any questions, feel free to ask. Thanks.